Okay, so day number 25. It's November 19th, 2021, about 8:30 a.m. I just got back a little while ago from my 25th lesson. It's going really well, but it was a rough day. So get to the airport all on time, everything's looking good, and I noticed that the wind was like 10 knots when I got to the airport, and then it slowed down to about 5, and when we were taking off it was about 7. And I was not expecting for the change of how my airplane was going to feel, like taking off down the runway with a pretty heavy, slight crosswind. So the wind was coming about like from pretty much like around pretty much like 11 o'clock, maybe even 10 o'clock. And I had to kind of deflect my ailerons into the wind. So pretty much turn my plane into the wind, or pretend like I'm turning my plane into the wind, and we took off. And it was a really bumpy flight. So if you do not like turbulence, you should be thankful that you were not a passenger, because literally a few times our head hit the ceilings of the airplane. It was pretty bumpy. Anyways, we get out over the Long Island Sound, northeast of Republic Airport, and we practice some maneuvers. So we practice, our slow flight, power off stall, power on stall. We practice, emergency procedures, and last but not least, I'm trying to think what else we practiced, but we did a lot. And it was really fun. We did some maneuvers. Definitely what we're focusing on now is maintaining heading during our power off and power on stall. So the power off stall I didn't have so much trouble on. The power on stalls, like pretty much every other time I've done a power on stall, I of course had some trouble. So pretty much, just have to take it, the whole thing a little slower, apply more right rudder pressure, but not too aggressively. This way, I don't I don't over coordinate myself to the right and then have to apply immediately left rudder pressure. And I'm sure, other new students who can relate to this is that either, I've come now to immediately apply right rudder when I get into my power on stall, and that's not necessarily appropriate. You have to apply right rudder pressure as appropriate to remain coordinated. And because I'm immediately applying right rudder pressure, I'm already off like 10 or 15 degrees from my heading. We only really did it once, because by the second time I was a little thrown about. I wasn't feeling myself. I didn't have the same confidence with the wind, even though really my instructor kept on telling me it's just bumpy. You should be able to do the same things. To me, I was so focused on keeping straight and level. It was rough. And there are students who literally are flying in that every single day, so I give them kudos. Most of the time I'm spoiled. So what really got bad was when we came in for landings. We had time to do about 3 or 4 touch and goes. So we get into right traffic for runway 32 at Republic. And we come in, and my first approach was pretty stable, I'd say. However, like I said, it was really bumpy, really windy. We did some gust calculation just to know that we were going to land at about 70 knots instead of 65, just for a little bit of a buffer for when the gust is removed or there is no gust. And I'm definitely getting the chills thinking about it. But we come in, and immediately, when you come in for landing with a heavy wind, oftentimes if it's a little bit of a crosswind, your nose you grab into it. So you point your nose into the wind. And probably about 200 feet, off the ground, 300 feet off the ground, my instructor starts pressing the right rudder and says, okay, it's time to press the right rudder. We got to make sure our nose is lined up at the center line. And I was conscious of this. But I would have done this a little later on in my flight. But at the same time, we're flying a Cessna. We're not flying a big airliner. So that's not necessarily what you're supposed to do, even though that's what you see airliners do. And I probably should have been adding that right rudder pressure. But that last minute change, I think at least threw me off. And I wouldn't have claimed it to that. But my instructor said, I gave you instruction last minute to make a change. And that probably threw you off a little bit. So the landing was a little rough. We landed a little bit to the right of the center line. We applied full power, and I was not trimmed properly, so I'm trying to pull back really hard. I felt like the plane was bouncing around a little bit on the runway. It was a feeling I never felt before. And at this point going forward, and many flight students I'm sure felt like this, and of course, pilots as well, when they're flying these smaller planes, as they're trying to progress their skills, At that point on through the rest of my flight, I definitely now can label it as feeling like a passenger, or feeling like I was on my discovery flight. Something happened at that point where I really just checked out a little bit of my attention, and I, probably could have done great if I was flying, straight and level and, flying a route or flying, a specific course. But, going down to do maneuvers again was not the best idea. So we came back for a second landing. And at this point, I had made my downwind turn and I was too far from the runway. I was already unsteady in, my mind just because of, my bouncing around a little bit on the runway, taking off again from the first touch. And then we get downwind, we turn base, we turn final, and the final approach is just, I'm steady, like I'm at the right altitude, I'm at the right airspeed, but I don't feel steady. And that was like a big difference today. Like, I just, with the gusts of wind, I see my airspeed indicator reading 65 knots and then up to 85 knots and then down to 70 knots. And I was like adjusting power quickly just to correct for that, push, pull on the throttle. And that, like I said, it was pretty steady, but we ended up ballooning. And the biggest problem that I had today, and this was the biggest mistake I've probably made yet, was I decided to do a go around, and before increasing my power to full throttle, I decided to raise my flaps. And two things that I definitely erred at was when you do a go around, the procedure is, you apply full throttle, so you have airspeed, you have power to regain airspeed, and then you slowly, the second error was you slowly, notch by notch, degree by degree, raise the flaps. So I decided, I'm just going to shoot the flaps up as if I was already on the ground, like a touch and go, which is probably, maybe that comes from the touch and go. And my instructor was amazing. He, gave a quick yelp, took control in 2 seconds and, caught my mistake. After the flight, I would definitely say that I felt like really downtrodden, like, oh my God, I've made all this progress in my landings and in my flight, and now it feels like, oh, I made this huge mistake that, I shouldn't have been making. I mean, I read like 35, 40 times already at night during my ground school, like throttle, like pitch attitude, and configuration. Throttle, attitude, configuration. And here I am doing configuration, attitude, throttle. So I went completely backwards. So it's a mistake. So my instructor, again, afterwards in our, post-flight conversation, he said to me, like, don't feel downtrodden by it. You're going to make mistakes. You're a flight student. Think about it and learn from it, and you won't do it again. And I'm telling myself I am not going to make that error again. Going forward, my go-arounds will be perfect. I do think that I'm just a little unfamiliar with the go-around procedure. We've only had 2 go-arounds in, one was instructed from ATC and one was instructed from my instructor, and I definitely think that should be a little bit more emphasized when you're starting to get comfortable landing. So that happened, and by then I'm just kind of like a little bit of a mess in my mind. Again, the next approach was definitely, in my mind, unsteady. And I think, my instructor kept on telling me, it's just the wind, it's just bumps. But for some reason, I couldn't clock out of it. So I'm ready for the next windy day. Meaning I want the wind to come back. I don't want, the rest of my flight school to be in smooth weather, because that's not reality. And I want the practice of flying through this hard wind. About 23 knots of gusty wind. And the last landing, my instructor helped me. And the second lesson, so first lesson is, remember that go-around procedure. I mean, for all flight students watching this video, make sure you focus on throttle, attitude, configuration. Throttle, attitude, configuration. Second lesson today was when we came in for our third landing, my instructor, he definitely said, okay, no more touch and goes. I think, this kid is clocked out. And again, I was very unsteady in my mind. It's been a lot of flying and not too much, just a little, I was thrown off from the usual, and that's like a good lesson to learn also. You're not going to show up every day to flight school and have the same flight plan. You're not going to show up and have the same airplane. You're not going to show up and have, everything working properly, and you have to be flexible. And this was another time that I have to be flexible going forward. But the last thing I wanted to mention was another lesson is that watching my flight instructor come in for the last landing with these heavy 23 knot gusts of wind, he pretty much, kept on talking me through the process of what he was doing. And the difference between what he was doing and what I was doing was I was controlling the airplane while he was correcting the airplane. So with a gust of wind, if we saw consistent high airspeed, he gently pulled the throttle back, rather than what I was doing, which was pulling the throttle back all the way practically to idle. When we slowed down, he was gently increasing the throttle rather than pushing it to full throttle. When I push it to full throttle, take it to idle, I immediately have a difference in my pitch. And unless I'm aware of holding that, which you don't really want to have because those are major corrections and major control movements when you're on final approach, which is not what you want, versus what he was doing, which was making small, little minor corrections. As well, I feel a little still unsteady with using that right rudder pretty heavily to correct for the crosswind while you're deflecting your ailerons into the wind. Because I feel like it's like a slip skid, so I feel like I'm going to drop 500 feet in, a few seconds. And while I'm doing that, you have to remember you're pitching down at the same time. Don't lose focus of you're pitching down towards your aiming point. So there's a lot going on at that. So just to recap, lesson number 1, go around procedure. Have to make sure you review that. Lesson number 2, I have to remember that I'm making small corrections as I come in for final approach. If there's anything major, better off performing that go around procedure. And number 3 is pitching down and, making sure that I'm paying attention to my aiming point. Even if I'm making crosswind correction, not to focus so much on the rudder control, but to do it naturally, which maybe just hasn't come yet. But yeah, it was fine. Yeah, so I'm excited for tomorrow's flight, of course. I'm like secretly praying that there's no wind again, but at the same time, got to keep on doing it, and I got to get it, and I want to get it, and I want to keep on pushing through these hard times, and you got to make those mistakes, and got to stay positive through those mistakes, because making mistakes is fine as a student. Especially when you have the instructor there, utilize the instructor to learn your mistakes and see where you need to improve. So that's what I'm trying to do. And this is a pretty big video, so I will also make one more note that I did take some videos of the lesson. I'm a new GoPro user, so of course the battery died. The SD card got filled up within the first half hour, so definitely going to watch that going forward. So I'll give a little bit of a takeoff today on my YouTube channel, but otherwise, I'm excited for tomorrow. Like I said, tomorrow we have a flight and a ground lesson, and then we're flying again on Monday. I was like, so excited for my solo, and today was definitely a setback a little bit, but probably more mentally than it really was. So definitely my personal minimums do not include 23 knots, okay, of gusty wind. But anyways, okay, that's it, and see you next time.